everybody. This is episode 112, I believe, of Accidents on Trial, and I'm going to bring my guest right up. Hey there,
Hey,
man. Thanks for coming on.
how's it going? Thanks for having me, man.
Good. Yeah, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself so we can get started?
Sure. I'm known as Meme Lord by some. No, so my name is Matt. And I have a podcast called Meme Lord Monday because I also have been known to run a Christian meme page called Memes for Jesus. I run it with my buddy Michael Schaefer, and it's been on the internet. It's basically one of the very first Christian meme pages to ever grace the internet, and uh, it's got a significant audience on Facebook and Instagram. And Meme Lord Monday is just like my personal podcast. I deal with a lot of Christians, and I get why people hate them. So I understand. And even though I still am a Christian, I like to make memes that kind of roast the objectively bad of Christianity.
Sure.
And being somebody who left Christianity for a while and came back, I feel as though I'm able to view a lot of Christianity through the eyes of people who don't claim God or want to know God. I understand, and so that's why I'm really honored that you'd bring me on, because like I've really become to really enjoy the atheist audience and community on TikTok.
Sure.
So I really just learned from you guys and been challenged by you guys, and just I appreciate you welcoming on.
Yeah, thank you for coming on for sure. What would you say is the bad of Christianity as you see it? I'm curious.
Where do I begin?
Right.
um, oh man, there's a lot. Honestly and genuinely, there is. Um, I feel like don't even know where to begin. I feel like the worst of the bad is like a lot of evangelical thought patterns and just like narrow-mindedness uh and I mean that, and not in the sense of they have blind faith, because I think there's some good to having faith that is unanswerable to an extent.
Mm.
But I think their narrowness comes more in like from a behavioral sense, that they don't have much tact and they're not really willing to question what they believe. Um, and I think that's a common thread that's objectively bad in evangelical America, at least. Um, and yeah, that's I think something I love to roast. I like roasting like you'll see the representation. Jesus has really bad PR. I mean, he has really good PR in America, because literally everyone has heard about him in America. But he also has really bad PR at the same time, because you have these $1 million um, television shows that portray really bad theology and really bad depictions of Christ, and I hate that stuff. There's a theology called prosperity gospel,
Yeah, yeah,
which is corrupt. It's
yeah.
literally
Totally.
corrupt, and it's horrendous. It's abhorrent. Um, so I don't mind throwing f bombs at that.
Yeah.
It's terrible, and so that's what I mean. And there's lots of other um just objectively bad behavior patterns and thought processes within Christianity as I observe it, in the sense that um they for a religion that we are supposed to be founded on loving our enemies, loving over all things. In fact, it's our foundational doctrines, to love. um so many Christians are so known for how hateful they are and how spiteful they are, um to incredible degrees. And so that's one thing that drove me away from Christianity, was the behavior of a lot of Christians. And it wasn't until I actually found Christians who lived their faith that I was more convinced of it.
Yeah,
So
that's what I was going to ask you next was what
Mhm.
drove you away and then what drove you back. Um, one thing that I hear often being said, and you just said it as well, is that the core of Christianity
Mm,
is love, and I struggle um, with that idea, and maybe it might be a difference in interpretation, and maybe you can explain to me why you believe that to be the case. Because from my perspective, theism is inherently dictatorial,
mm,
and uh, I see it as, especially again, I don't know what you believe about hell and heaven and those kind of ideas. But I see Christian theology and all theology as being just another way of uh, sort of rejecting the other. That while we are told on one hand that it's all about including and that everybody is the same under we're all children of God. It's like, yeah, we're all children of God until you do something that is viewed as the wrong thing under the eyes of God, and then it's here comes eternal damnation.
Well, I would understand why you would come to that conclusion, because that's certainly the way that Christians treat non-Christians at times.
Mhm.
Like that's what you see. I think scripturally, there's a lot of different things you said there that I'm not sure like how to tackle in an accurate way, because I'm Presbyterian, and which means I have more of a Reformed theology, but I'm a bit more liberal than the average like Calvinist Reformed guy. I still affirm like libertarian free will and all these other things. Anyways, I think um, there's like thought processes in Scripture that could say, well, we're not all children of God. We're all creations of God, and those like the term or the vocabulary of children is more of like the sonship that comes with being a believer, like a son of God, and having like what Scripture describes as like a oneness with Christ. That's when you would have the actual mantle of being a child of God, I believe. Whereas otherwise, you'd be more like a creation of God. And there's lots of different ways you can interpret that and understand that. But I think that's acted out by a lot of Christians, in a very experiential way. It's like, if you're not a Christian, that you're just a creature, and I'm going to treat you as such until you become a Christian, and I'm going to hold you to my Christian standards until you join my team, which I think is also objectively wrong. I don't think you should hold people who are aware of the Christian doctrines or aware of Christianity and hold them to Christian standards. I think, like, as far as like scruples and behavior, I don't think that that's what Scripture teaches. I don't think it teaches you to correct the behavior of an unbeliever. So I disagree with that as well. I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Yeah,
There's a
no,
lot there.
I get where you're coming from. I mean, I think I definitely can have more respect for that kind of interpretation than that of some Christians that I encounter on a daily basis. Um, I think for me, the problem remains that while obviously I think your approach is far more humanistic and not confrontational, what I'm wondering is, what do you think the reality of our circumstance is? Like, do you believe that uh, there is this place called heaven and this place called hell, and that unbelievers will are going to hell, or is hell a permanent place under your view? Like, how do you view these things?
Yeah, I mean, I can see why the very doctrine of heaven and hell is problematic for people who don't believe. I get it. I personally hold to there being, a heaven, a place where God exists, and a hell, a place of God's wrath. Where, and but what hell looks like, I'm kind of semi-agnostic on, because there's tons of different interpretations of hell. I think heaven is pretty cut and dry. I think in Scripture, but hell, there's there's a lot of ambiguity there. Honestly, um, one could even take, I believe, and I might get crucified by my own audience by saying this, but one could even take like a more universalist approach and still, technically fall within Christendom, meaning like a universal reconciliation doctrine that says that no one really goes to hell. There's just like a cleansing process or a reconciliatory process that happens post mortem. So, as far as like a hell being a doctrine, it's that's a tough one for me, because there's annihilationism, there's universalism, there's purgatorial doctrines. There's so much going on there in Scripture that I'm not even sure where to land. If you were to really, you know, get me into a corner, I think I'd still maybe affirm a type of eternal conscious torment. But I think annihilationism is also attractive, and you can also be a universalist on annihilation. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't really care about that, and I'm not trying to. And I'm going to rant here for a bit, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
I think a lot of Christians are motivated by this, by hell. Like hell is their motivating factor in many different ways. They're motivated to be a Christian because of the existence of hell or their doctrine of hell. They're motivated to be mean and cruel to non-believers because of their doctrine of hell, because they feel as though their oppression and offense to the unbeliever is going to somehow scare tactic them into, away from hell, like they're doing them a favor or something. Like I've heard many apologists say, me preaching God's gospel to the unbeliever, and saving them from hell is the most loving thing you can do. Which I'm not sure is necessarily true at all times. I don't think I need to go up in your face if you're aware of, if you're already aware of Jesus, if you're already aware of the message of Christ, and you're already aware of what the standard belief of Christian I don't even Christianity is. Um, I don't know what good it's going to do you for me to try to snatch you out of hell. Um, Especially considering all the other back data of scripture that talks about how much onus your own responsibility, you carry on your own choices. So that's where I kind of stand on hell and kind of how that affects my
I,
belief.
I was going to say this as well, and some of the comments are kind of echoing this feeling is that um, scripture is definitely not cut and dry on heaven.
Oh, okay.
Um, Now, I'm not sure. I think this is my problem, right?
Mm,
And this is something that I think is true for all literature, is that there's always a gap between our interpretation and what the authors meant to say. And so I
sure.
think any time that anybody believes they have the correct interpretation or the certain interpretation, whether it's
Hmm.
about heaven, hell, or any concept, I think we're into a real linguistic problem there, where I think there's always some ambiguity, especially when you're talking about an ideology that is deep in metaphor. Um,
Yeah, for sure. And I get what Deadpool's saying too. Like as far as who goes to heaven, who's there, what it is. Yeah, there's a lot of ambiguity there. As far as like I guess heaven's implicator. It's like where God is. I think that's
mhm.
pretty cut and dry. That's what I meant by that. I
Sure.
apologize if I
No,
wasn't
no, I
precise.
think I get what you're saying. Um, yeah, I guess, I can't, to me, the idea of an all powerful and all loving God that also has a place of eternal torment is inherently contradictory.
Hmm.
So, like, if that, I would say, and you've heard my lives before, like, I'm an agnostic atheist. I don't
Right.
claim to know whether or not God exists or doesn't exist. I say that I don't believe because I have seen no evidence or good argument for the existence of God. But that God, I would say, doesn't exist.
Hmm.
A God that can be defined as loving and yet would have a place for eternal punishment for temporary actions in this life. To me, those concepts are contradictory. It's like saying a square circle. That couldn't be the case. Um,
Yeah, I know. Like, and that's what I mean. Like, I'm still learning as far as it comes to like hell, like crazy. And I don't intend to give you good answers tonight either.
no, you're fine.
I'm learning. I've actually learned a lot from you and your challenges to my faith. So, I mean, I appreciate I appreciate your line of questioning. Um, I think like the way I have been reconciling it, like I said, if you were going to back me into a corner, hell is more a form of God's justice. Now, and I agree with you. Like, what is that? Is that fair? Is that are the weights really fair? If it's if there's eternal conscious torment for temporary actions, I don't know. I don't, like I said, I'm not even. I don't even know where to begin with that. So that's where I
I,
land.
I would say conclusively not that
Mm,
that couldn't be just. And I think there's ways around that. Like, for example, one thing that's made sense to me is that hell is not a place of torment for eternity, but simply what hell is distance from God. Um,
yeah, that point's argued to my knowledge. That point is argued where evil, death, torture, all that is bad is the privation of God. Where others have said hell is a place of God's wrath, where so he's present and he's actively destroying evil. Like I said, I don't know where to land on it. Because I don't know. I'm still figuring it out.
what would you say? like I guess my question is, and feel free to ask me anything too. I don't want you to
Sure.
feel like you're just being questioned here. Um, but how, what do you think justifies your belief in God? Like, why are you a Christian?
Oh, that's a that's a good one. Um, so what brought me to Christianity, like I said, what brought me back to it, um, is really just a culmination of events in my life, um, like synchronicity that I found and I was convinced of with scripture, that I'm still learning. And like I said, I question my own beliefs still. And every year I go through a period where I reanalyze whether or not I still believe Christianity or not. I do this to myself ever since I've rededicated my life, so to speak, to Christ. I do this, and I want to make sure that I'm convinced of what I believe. There's just been too much that's happened in my personal life, um, like events, experiences, and that line up directly with what I see of Christ in Scripture.
Could you give me a
Um,
couple examples?
sure. So, I mean, this is a weird one because it's a miracle that's happened in my life. Um, so I was an ectopic pregnancy, believe it or not. Like my mother, if you don't know, for those who don't know what an ectopic pregnancy is, it's like when you don't fall into the womb, you're within, the fetus is within the fallopian tube, and it's a death sentence for the mother, and so it's like an abortive procedure that like the doctor encourages. So my mother actually went in, um, to have that looked at. She was like, no, I'm not going to get an abortive procedure because she's a crazy Christian, woman, and everybody was encouraging her to get the procedure because I was not viable. Um, and so she just kept continued with the pregnancy, and they had the X-rays or X-rays, whatever they had back then in the 80s, to show that I had in one area I'd moved from the fallopian tube to the womb, which is a medical miracle. Um, and so that was one thing that was pretty interesting to me. Um, I didn't, I always questioned my mom about it, and I was always like, "Are you sure?" And there's multiple witnesses to that, and so I mean, I chalked that up to being a miracle. I know, and I'm convinced that telling people miracles, happen is a proof of God. I'm convinced that that's not really good evidence. I get it because there's lots of different factors you can weigh into that, but it's something that happened in my own personal life that's convinced me. So that's how I would answer that, and I don't expect that to be good evidence for you to believe.
Yeah, no, no, no. I mean, I don't. I think what I always fail to understand is the jump from here's something that happened that
Hmm.
is maybe unexplained or that we haven't seen before, which I acknowledge those phenomena. They, that type of thing does happen in reality.
Yeah.
But to go from that to saying it's a miracle and a sign of God, as opposed to something happened that could have a perfectly naturalistic, non-supernatural explanation. Because it's not like medical science has like the totality of all possible knowledge of what can and can't happen.
Hmm.
Like these are, there are many gaps in our knowledge. So to me, it always seems like when those type of events, especially personal events, are the things that convince a person. I think that there is always some other kind of motivator. That
Yeah.
there is sort of a bias in the backdrop where you're choosing to interpret these events under a specific lens to justify a narrative that you've already sort of accepted to begin with.
I mean, for all I know, it could be the case. Psychologically, I feel like it could be that because I was raised in a Christian home,
Sure,
and this looks like this, and so therefore it must mean this. It could be the case. I mean, I'm willing to question it myself. But I mean, like I said, if it's something that I feel correlates directly with what I
sure.
see
Then
in
it's going to
scripture,
just, yeah, no, I
that's
get it.
going to justify my belief. I'm willing to question it. But like I said, I totally understand that this wouldn't be something that would be convincing for other people.
This is something that Hotaka is saying. Have you considered that the doctors were wrong because technology back then wasn't
I,
great?
it could be, yeah, it could be, and
Yeah.
like I said, I'm open to not being a sign of God. But
Some are saying, so Titan is saying once typical attach is either moving, so they're saying that maybe they just got it wrong. But yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying.
could
I get
be,
what. And look, I
could be.
think we're all guilty, atheists included, to of when we have a worldview, we I think naturally lean towards the type of information that tends to uh, justify our worldview that much more. So I don't think that theists are alone in that. I just think that the way that I operate is I'm trying to make as little amount of assumptions as possible
Right.
in the way that I form any belief. And so for me, I never, and look, like I said many times before, I'm not in principle against anything being the case. It's just that I would need something concrete that couldn't just be explained away by psychology, that couldn't just be explained away by coincidence or some ignorance or lack of information.
Yeah. And
Um,
I mean, I'm just a dumb meme lord at the end of the day. I don't claim that this is evidence for God.
mhm,
It's evidence for me
yeah,
for God, because of like I said, the culmination of other things, and it could be confirmation bias. I'm willing to admit that. I respect agnosticism for its willingness to be honest and say, I don't know, and I want to carry that into my own faith to say it's still faith to me. It's not something
right.
that I have Cartesian certainty on.
Sure,
You
sure.
know,
Is there anything that you think could change your mind?
sure. There could be if there's something that scientists discover tomorrow that's like, oh, it's simulation that we're all in that's controlled by this, extraplanetary who knows. I'd be like, I guess it's time to hang it up. I don't know. It's just
Right.
like my faith is near and dear to me, but I don't I don't want to be foolish to say that, if something like concretely, you talk about something that's concrete.
Mhm.
If something is concrete enough to disprove my faith, I mean, I would be a fool to say, well, I'm still going to believe it anyway.
What would you say has been your, other than shitty Christians' behavior? What would you say has been like philosophically the biggest challenge
Oh
to your
man.
faith?
Well, first, just learning philosophy. That
Sure.
just, I
Yeah.
mean, I feel like I'm like philosophy adjacent because I know people who know philosophy way better than me, and I try and keep up. And it's intriguing to me. I'm the slow learner, so I just try my best to learn what I can.
Sure.
Um, but yeah, philosophically, I guess it is hard. Um, just just the sheer amount of information that I feel like I would need to be convinced of anything. Um, because when I was trying to reconstruct my faith, there was a period where I was like, is this real? Is this a real thing to believe in? And at the end of the day, I like it was so much conflicting information. I had to just tell myself, well, you're either going to believe it or you're not. You can't just sit on the fence the rest of your life. You have to choose what you're going to believe. Um, and I don't mean that in an offensive way towards people who are agnostic. I don't mean that as a direct correlation to what they might be doing, because I feel like I can still have a lot of agnosticism in my belief and hold to like the core tenets of Christianity,
Sure.
because I don't need to have concrete evidence and Cartesian certainty about all the things that I believe, especially if I feel as though there's more data proving my belief than against it.
That's
Um,
something I definitely want to hear more about, like more
okay.
about this hitter. But there's a couple comments here that are interesting.
Yeah.
Kat wants to know, how do you reconcile things in the Bible that are just factually not true?
So my textual criticism is not that good, but I understand that there's um, errors in scripture. Like I'm against inerrancy. I think
Mm,
there's a lot of fundamental Christians that try and convince you that inerrancy is just one of the fundamental doctrines of Christianity, but it's just not. Um, I think you can totally affirm, uh, there being lots of hyperbole and lots of poetic, you know, um, uh, issues within Scripture. Um, and I think there can be factual errors. And as long as like the major message of Scripture is still throughout Scripture. Um, I don't even know if what I said just made sense. But if the general message of Scripture, I think, is somewhat clear, which I think it is. then it doesn't really matter to me if there's like errors here and there. To
Sure.
my knowledge, the errors aren't as huge as some would claim them to be. But I could be wrong. Like I said, my textual criticism is not that good.
Hotlager says 1 Corinthians 15:33 tells Christians to not even deal with us non-believers at all because we'll corrupt you. What do you
That's a
think
good
about it?
question. So yeah, there's lots of scriptures that talk about how Christians should interact with unbelievers, and there's different scenarios in which the context is involved. So I do have a Bible degree, so I have some knowledge of scripture. I know that the context of First Corinthians there is talking about dealing with like unbelievers in like a more closer proximity, as far as like closely related in like business or like marriage or things that would involve you needing to attach yourself to their worldview. And that's what it's talking about, more like a corruption of your worldview and your values, not necessarily, you know, not befriending them or not interacting with them at all, because you find other scriptures that say, you know, to be wise about the way you act around unbelievers. And you know, Jesus' example himself, the Pharisees were astonished with the people he was hanging out with. Um, so I think, you know, there's context to at least that passage.
I want to address because your friend Than is
Yeah,
here.
he said you can start over.
Yeah, I want to address something,
Yeah,
and
go
I'm not
for
going
it.
to be able to do this in much detail because this is not really, uh, it's a conversation for another time, perhaps. But um, what I don't understand, and then maybe you can explain it in the comments. You in our conversations you apply Bayesian, uh, what was it?
Epistemology.
Yeah, to somehow justify theistic claims, and I can't comprehend how you do that. It seems to me that what Bayesian epistemology depends on to some degree, it's like an equation. Like you have the denominator has to be the what was the name of it that was brought the other day? Um, Priors. So it's
Hmm.
not just the idea that okay, let's assume this event is a real phenomena. You also need priors to go along with that within the equation. And the problem is you don't have that for any kind of theistic claim. It all ends up going back to zero. Um, I don't. I think what you're doing is you're uh, so he says, yes, you assess the prior probability of theism via simplicity, for example. Um, Again, this is incredibly strange to me that that would be your approach, because for me, it's far simpler to imagine that there's a universe without a God. That the thing, for example, the evil that we see in the world is far better explained within a godless universe than one in which a God exists. Um, and yes, they do. But I mean, look at
So
Oppie's response to your approach. Uh, I think that he answers quite well that type of. I think, frankly, and again, it's no disrespect to you. Like I said, I would love to have a conversation with you someday, but I think you're taking certain tools out of context and using those tools incorrectly. I don't think that that is how we do statistics and how we do likelihoods and probabilities. They require some sort of uh, like I said, priors that have actually are actually grounded in something concrete, not just that you make up. But anyway, go ahead, man.
yeah, no, I was just gonna say I'm gonna do a horrible job of trying to explain what I heard Than say, because I had him on my podcast and
Mhm.
he explained this in I think fairly good detail. And I know he probably could have went on for several more hours to describe what, like how he does his method. Um, but it sounds like he, you know, in order to reach the hypothesis of, you know, does God exist? There's lots of back data, and one of those being, you know, the compilation of fine tuning, consciousness, agency, things like that on what would be expected on theism. And that's what I heard him say. And I'm probably not even representing what he said correctly, but I know that's like at least some part to his formula.
Yeah, so he's and again, I don't want to
Yeah.
go too far off, but he says, okay, but your whole counter to me falls apart. You keep saying you can't do that while then pointing to Oppie and Draper, who rely on this to come from theism. I can't comment on Draper, but I can comment on Oppie. That's not my reading of what he's doing at all. Um, I don't. He's not applying it. So let me phrase it this way. I think he has concrete priors when he does talk about probability, but when he doesn't, um, just because an atheist uses that method, let's say, look, maybe I haven't heard all the things that Oppie has said. Maybe he does apply that approach. That's not a justification. I would criticize him doing that just as much as I would criticize any theist doing the same. Just because it's an atheist doesn't mean I'm going to be like, oh, it's okay that you do it. Like, if you're talking about probabilities that are, from my perspective, in principle ungrounded in anything that means anything, I'm going to reject that. Yeah, but saying that atheism is simpler is not the same thing as talking about probability without priors. The reason why he's saying it's simpler is because we at least have a concrete basis for, through naturalism, we have something concrete that counts as certain explanations. So, for example, I agree. Matt, you brought up fine tuning, right?
Mm-hmm.
I agree that we observe fine tuning,
Mm-hmm.
but why assume that the constants being what they are is better explained by deity rather than by nature? Especially in a context where we are told constantly by Christians that the purpose, God created us with purpose, that it was his intention for life to emerge. From my perspective, fine tuning, maybe this is controversial to say, but I don't know. The fine tuning for me is a point against theism, because from my perspective, it shouldn't matter how the constants were changed. Why would there even be a need for constants to begin with? It wouldn't matter how they were changed. Life would still emerge if that was God's purpose for life to emerge.
Can I ask you a question? Because you said I could ask you questions.
Of course.
So on your live the other day, you referenced the argument from psychophysical harmony, and your interest, like you wanted J Mike to speak on that. So you're obviously familiar with it. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Because I mean, I think that would be the objection to your objection that you just made, would be that, there's the fine tuning also includes a psychophysical harmony with like the C fibers and how that interacts with us epistemically.
So what we're talking about
Not
there
epistemically,
is,
sorry, existentially.
so the issue there is to diminish consciousness to simply observing the brain is incoherent, because we are operating through consciousness. So it's not like we look at a brain and we see the experience. That doesn't make any sense. I agree that the brain is producing the experience, right? That I'm not claiming that consciousness is somehow independent of brains doing what brains are doing. What I'm arguing against is this idea that what we're observing is synonymous or to a one-to-one correspondence with consciousness. That's like saying you're driving a car and simultaneously you're observing driving the car from outside of the car. You get what I'm saying?
I think so. I like I said, I'm a slow learner, so
No, here's
I'll
another way
think
of
about what you're
explaining it,
saying.
right? Like, so pain cannot be diminished to C fibers because other beings experience pain, and they don't have the same sort of they don't have the C fiber that we have. Yet we wouldn't say that a dog isn't experiencing pain if something bad happens to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then, it turns into sort of a type of functionalism. Then it's like, there is something about all the structures of the mind that have certain shared universals, where biologically may be expressed in humans in a certain kind of way, but the same sort of thing is found in other beings even if it's structurally somewhat different. It still leads to the same type of experience. Um, so let me see here. Um, Tan says you cannot explain fine-tuning data doing naturalism. They would just be brute facts on naturalism. I don't agree with that. I don't think it would just be brute facts. I think that's a statement that I don't see any basis for. I don't see any reason why there wouldn't be some natural explanation for why the constants are what they are. I mean, it could be that we have one universe and it's necessarily how it is, and the constants are necessarily what they are. Or it could be one in an infinite amount of universes in which then it's just a matter of percentages, which happen to be in one universe as opposed to another. I don't see how he gets to that conclusion. As far as, and again, I don't want to steer too far away from our conversation, but it's strange to me when theists talk about theism making predictions, because I'm yet to see one. Other than vague claims to prophecy, theism is not generating novel predictions. It's looking at the data we already have, then moving backward to create a story to try to explain that data. But I think there's a difference between predictions and expectations. For example, science actually produces predictions in the future. Like we make a prediction of something that we haven't yet observed, then later down the line, we find that prediction turn out to be true. Looking at reality as it is, and then going backwards to come up with a story to say, oh, well, we see evil in the world, and we come up with a story that the fall of man took place, and that explains why evil exists. That's not a prediction. That's a just so story, from my perspective. But actually, one question I wanted to ask you is,
Sure.
what is your view on atonement?
Oh boy.
Because that is one of my issues against Christianity. One is intellectual, just I don't think there's any good evidence, but one is moral. That I actually think that some of the lessons within Christianity and within theism as a whole are deeply morally bankrupt from where I'm standing.
So what I'm curious if you could flesh that out for me. So like, what about the atonement do you feel is immoral?
Yeah, so I think the idea that my wrongdoings, and again, I know that not every Christian interprets it this way, but
Yeah.
many do. The idea that my sins could be washed away to the scapegoating and human sacrifice of another person, to me is incomprehensible. Like, if I'm lucky, the person I've hurt might forgive me, and I might learn from my mistakes, and might try to do better so I don't hurt that person again. But any of what happened there is not going to be erased or made okay because a believed prophet was tortured 2,000 years ago. That to me is ridiculous. And as far as like other moral issues with Christianity, the idea of not caring about tomorrow, the idea of leaving everything behind,
Yeah.
the idea of hell, the idea of a God which sets up the circumstances for evil to arise and then punishes us for it. The inherent dictatorial nature of theism to begin with. This idea that we can be convicted of thought crimes. The idea that we didn't elect this God to be in power, and that we are forced to follow these commandments. All of that, I think, is problematic.
Yeah. No, I hear that. Yeah, I mean, there's lots of views of atonement that I'm aware of, and lots that I'm unaware of. I think, man, because there's a lot that you have to accept and adopt on Christianity to understand like the system of sin and why there needed to be, I affirm what's like a penal substitutionary atonement, where so there's like a, Christ took the penalty necessary for sin, and which made it so that it could be forgiven, because otherwise, like our offense towards a perfect God would require perfect sacrifice, so he provided it for us as an act of love for us. And so that's the way I understand the atonement. There's other atonement theories and doctrines where it's like there's Christus Victor, and a couple of other I don't even know the names of. But yeah, that's the one I think is most consistent with Scripture. It's that God's act of love for us as an extension of His love, and forgiveness, for us. Um, was that penal substitutionary atonement. But I get your objections because it's like, why would he need to do that for himself? From himself. I know that's one objection. Um, and I get why it doesn't really make sense. But having all of Scripture in view, with like you acknowledge the atonement as something that is necessary and loving by God and merciful, and actually the fact that He endured it, Himself for us, is an even I think it's an even bigger display of the lengths he was willing to go to express that love. So and I know this all sounds like fairy tales to your
Well, no,
audience and
well,
to
no,
you.
it's not. Well, yeah, but my
Yeah.
issue is a secondary one, which is this idea that, again, from my perspective, if evil could only arise if God allowed for the circumstances for that evil to arise, because God
Mhm.
cannot fail in His intentions if He's an all-powerful and all-perfect being. It's like He knew the fall of man would come. He set up the circumstances that would allow for the fall of man to come. And so He also knew that He would send Himself, or, well, I don't know if you believe Jesus is God or how
Yes.
you. Okay.
Yeah. I think you need to be a
Um,
Christian. You have to as a Christian.
so from my perspective, it almost sounds like the entire thing is. I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but I
No,
don't.
it's
This
fine.
is really how it comes across to me.
Yeah.
Um, God patting Himself in the back. There, like, you say it's an act of love, but where is the love in setting up the circumstances where people can go through this kind of suffering?
Mhm.
When people say, "Well, wouldn't we just be robots then if evil couldn't arise?"
Right.
Um, I don't understand that perspective, because I assume that you believe God is free.
Yeah, this is where you're going to lose me because freedom, like libertarian free will, as it applies to God and as it applies to human, I'm still learning because it's so
Yeah.
complex. There's a high level of complexity with this, and I'm still learning um, theodicies and like problems of evil, like how to reconcile problem of evil. Um, the way where I stand right now is like as I talked with I don't know if you were there when I was talking with J Mike about Molinism. Um, and how I feel like it does a decent job. Than's trying to convince me out of it, and he knows more about this than I do. But I think that on Molinism, it's basically the framework where God is free and we are free, and He basically opens up the world to all the possibilities and counterfactuals of what we would do given a circumstance. And all of our free choices were able to run amok, and then He creates circumstances in which everything is favorable, even um, even though He allowed us to be free. And I think, like I said, I'm still figuring it out, to
No,
be
sure,
honest.
and I appreciate that honesty, and I think it's good that you have that openness. I think that I wish more Christians were that way. From my perspective, it doesn't make sense to call this God all loving, who would create the circumstances that we experience, especially. And it's not like, again, there's no contradiction here between being free but only being able to choose an infinity of good choices.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Especially because in heaven, like, this is the idea, right? Like, in heaven, we can't make evil choices. So
Hmm.
it's like, so it's wrong for us to be robots on this planet, but then it's fine for us to become robots in heaven.
Yeah,
Like,
I mean, I don't know. I don't know how to answer that in a way that's satisfactory.
sure,
But like, I guess if I were
take your
to
time. Thanks for coming on. I think I
Oh, okay.
may have annoyed him with my lack of understanding of theism, probably
It's,
from his
I'm
perspective.
starting to think you brought me on just so you guys could talk.
No, I wasn't expecting him
I
to
know,
come
I
on.
know,
I had
I
no
know.
idea he was going to come.
I'm just playing, but like, yeah, I think that's a fair objection. I think it's a good objection because it's like, why didn't God just create it so that we didn't have to go through this turmoil? And there's as a Christian, I think there's on things like this, you kind of have to appeal to mystery
Sure.
at a certain point
Right.
because there's a lot of subjects that the Bible is just like, hey, God is doing what He wants, and you just have to be okay with that. And
Yeah. Well, I guess
you
my
know,
question becomes at that point: how many appeals to mystery does the Christian have to make
mhm.
before they come to the I don't want to say realization because that sounds condescending.
I appreciate that. I appreciate it.
Come to the belief that maybe the worldview is inconsistent or indefensible.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I challenge myself every year and I'm open to considering that more. Like,
Yeah.
how many appeals do we have to make? Um, I think that where there are appeals to mystery, I think I like to think at least now that I'm okay with them because if Scripture does, I have to trust that also Scripture says that He is good and loving, and the things that are mysterious to me are being worked out in a loving way.
Right.
So I have to take that as part of my faith. Um, if there's things that I find that are immoral, like for instance, our boy Jeff who does like the slavery live on
Hmm.
TikTok,
Yeah.
that challenged me to be honest. When I went on there and I just got absolutely destroyed by a bunch of atheists on that topic. I had to learn more about that. And I found I think some good answers and satisfactory answers to it. Um, a lot of the things that drove me away from Christianity to begin with was just a lot of BS.
Yeah.
Because the way I was seeing it acted out.
Yeah.
But I feel like the BS levels within Scripture, I'm personally having a harder time finding that because I'm finding good answers and satisfactory answers, at least for me,
Maybe
within Scripture.
I would love to have you back at some point in the future and go into more detail about what those answers are. Uh,
The thing is, they're satisfactory for me. I don't think that they're
sure.
going to be satisfactory for your audience or you
Probably
or
not.
yourself.
But I'm curious to understand how your mind works, like why they're
Okay.
satisfactory to you. That's why I'm asking, because I think
Yeah.
that it's important to compare and contrast the way we think about these things. Like for me, one criticism that I've heard often by Christians is they claim that, well, atheists get mad when God intervenes, and then atheists get mad when God doesn't intervene. So it's like, well, you can have it both ways. But from
Hmm.
my perspective, a loving God would intervene, but when evil takes place. But by intervening, I don't mean a global flood. I don't mean exterminate an entire group of people.
Yeah.
And if God is all powerful, not a drop of blood would need to be spilled for for things to be changed in a non-violent way. This is why when it's like, okay, well, yeah, the scripture, like you said, the scripture tells us that God is all good and all loving, and you're going to put your faith in that statement. But to me, everything about what we see in the world and then what we see of God's character within the Bible completely undermines any notion of goodness that I think we can understand. It's like at that point, well, okay, well, we're just going to define whatever God does as good just by
Yeah.
definition. It loses any meaning to me.
I mean, honestly, to be frank, I think that sounds more of like an external critique. Um, because internally, God would have done those, certain acts for just reasons, even though it might not seem just to us. But on my view, I feel as though since God is the objective moral lawgiver, which I know you disagree with wholeheartedly,
Mhm.
um, I feel as like He is justified in some of those, those decisions. And the thing is, I don't mean to kind of like wave off the whole problem of evil thing because I know that
Yeah,
ties in
yeah,
big time to this. Because like I personally struggle. Like, well, if I'm being 100% transparent, I struggle with the natural evil that we see in the world, like cancer,
yeah.
tornadoes, tsunamis. I struggle with that big time. Like, how can God allow those things? I question that. Um, but I feel as though if I need to have faith that God has prevailing reasons to allow these things to happen somehow, some way. And that's just part of believing in God, I think, is just to know, because he is God, because he's designated as, a supreme being, he does know better, and he has prevailing reasons that are strategic and unknown to me.
But right, but I think fundamentally my problem with that perspective is that it essentially makes any sort of uh, problem for the view sort of dogmatically sealed away, where it's like, no matter how many examples of God acting immorally I
Mhm.
can come up with, well, if you just define God as moral just as a definitional, in a definitional move, well then, uh, or God as just as a definitional move,
Mhm.
well then, if God genocides the whole world, it's right because God said it's right. And to me, that is a complete stripping away of morality. It's like a complete stripping away of justice. It's just calling it justice or calling it moral by just because, um, as a result of that which is in the highest power. This is why I call theism ultimately tyrannical,
Mhm.
because we're just saying, well, God is the arbiter, and so he's that which is in the highest power. So what he says goes. That to me is not morality. That to me is power. That to me is tyranny. Um, and I think there are better explanations for morality than
Yeah.
that. But I understand, obviously from your perspective.
Yeah, and and honestly, I have to concede on the moral argument, because you guys get into that for hours on end. You get into these thought experiments that are just way beyond me. So, I mean, I'm still learning, and
Yeah,
I appreciate your challenges. I want to learn more.
sure.
But as it stands, it's unfortunate that I have to appeal to mystery on certain issues. I want to learn better answers, but I don't have them right now.
Well, I would love to have you back and see the way in which your beliefs develop over time. The more
Sure.
you understand these issues and study philosophy and study theology, uh, you know, I want to say, regardless of our differences, and there are many, um, I definitely respect your openness. I
Thanks, man.
respect your honesty in the way you engage in these conversations, and that you are okay saying, "I don't know. I don't have an answer to this yet. I'm trying to figure it out." If more Christians acknowledge that, if more people acknowledge that, but
Mhm.
especially theists that I engage with, I would be far less confrontational. And I do look. I try to be civil. I try to be calm, and
Yeah.
especially on the lives. But uh, I don't always succeed at that, because I think I get very triggered by arrogance, especially when
Yeah.
it's in the context of what I don't think is uh, a credible methodology.
Yeah,
So
and I mean, I don't want to be self-complimentary, but like I will join you in being, annoyed by those theists, because I that's what drove me away from Christianity, was people like that. People who were know-it-all but know nothings,
right,
I call them like brain smoothers, or
yeah,
not
yeah,
smooth-brained, but like people that try to iron everyone else's brain out. I like Yeah, I can't stand that. And I catch myself being more upset at Christians online than atheists, because I
yeah,
understand where the atheist is coming from,
right,
and I understand the plight. Um, and I don't think a lot of Christians understand how they're coming off to
sure.
unbelievers.
What do you think? And I guess you've been there before, but I guess if you were to lose your faith,
Mhm.
what do you think would be different about your life, or what do you think you would lose or potentially gain?
I gotta think about that one. So the way that my life is right now, the way my life's set up right now is I draw my I draw a lot of my, I guess, moral compass from scripture and the person of Christ. Um, I probably would still do that if I
Yeah,
lost my faith, to be honest with you.
right.
I find Christ and the person of Christ to have the highest ethical code. I haven't found more. There's probably one out there. I haven't found it. Um, feel free to send it to me,
Sure.
memelordmonday@gmail.com if you find something. But like, I find as though his moral code, his ethic, his behavior to be the most satisfactory and convicting in my own life. Um, because of, it challenges me to be more loving, to be more self-sacrificial, and to be something that I'm not inherently. I inherently want to be very vengeful and hateful.
Hmm.
And I'm challenged by scripture to not be that. Um, and so that's how, like, if I were to stop believing, I would probably still keep that from my faith, which is kind of one of my, I guess, confirmation. Um, like, what's it, confirmation bias? I don't know if that's even the correct term. It's probably one of the things that keeps me to my faith, is knowing that it's just something that is it transcends my own moral code.
I would say that all the all the things that we may agree on would be good moral rules for how to engage in life and engage with the other. Like you said, those can be retained outside of any faith in the supernatural. There is nothing about those lessons that would cease to be true, even if Jesus wasn't what Christians think he is. The importance of kindness and empathy are still truths.
Right.
Um, and so, uh, yeah, I mean, I think one thing to potentially think about that I think is interesting. I don't know if you ever heard of Levinas.
Leviness.
Levinas, yeah.
Oh, yeah, I don't think I've heard about that.
So he takes an interesting approach to morality, where while, from my perspective, a very important foundation for morality is empathy,
Hmm.
and it's like recognizing the other in the way in which we're similar, like finding the humanity within ourselves. But he takes a slightly different approach. He says there's actually an even there's another approach, which I think should coincide with the empathy. He tends to sort of put the empathy a little bit on the side, where he says we have to embrace the other in their otherness, because to some degree, trying to diminish the other to ourselves in the way in which we are alike
Hmm.
is doing violence to their identity. It is in our gaze of the other that we objectify the other in some sense. So he wants to say the real moral approach is to actually embrace the other in their difference. And I think that's true to a point. Obviously, like there
Yeah.
are certain things that I'm not gonna embrace in somebody if I think those things are in themselves detrimental. But generally speaking, I think the idea of embracing the other in our sameness and otherness are very important moral lessons. And I think that you can have those ideas and and follow the teachings of Christ, morally speaking, without having to believe anything on insufficient evidence.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I definitely want to look into that. What is it? Le-
Levinas, I'll
Levinas.
DM you. I'll
Sure,
DM you some of his writings and some other stuff. So,
for sure.
um, is there anything else that you want to add? Anything you want to ask or?
Yeah, I wanted to actually preach the gospel to you right now. Cease and no, no, I wouldn't do that, dude.
Yeah, I'm always
No,
open
man.
to hearing anything. You know?
I just, well, I do that sarcastically because I know that's like a lot of Christians would do that, like that bait and switch.
A lot of people, a lot of atheists get very mad um, at the idea of Christians trying to share their belief system,
Hmm.
like and preach and that kind of stuff. They're like, "Oh, why are you forcing this on me?" I've honestly never taken that approach at all.
Oh, that's
Like,
awesome.
I understand if somebody thinks that their ideology is what's going to save me.
Hmm.
I don't begrudge them for trying to do what they think is the right thing. Now, if I say, it's one thing if they ask, right? They ask first, and I say yes or I say no. If I say no, then okay, confession is done, and then I'll get mad if they don't accept the no.
Hmm.
But I usually would not say no because I'm okay with it. It just there's certain context in which it you know in my past it wasn't okay. It was just another situation or the time or place,
Right.
and that's when it's a problem.
Yeah, like the
Um,
street preachers, or
I don't even mind the street preachers because I can just walk away.
right.
But I'm speaking of specifically, I was uh, you know someone that I was very close to uh, died of leukemia last year,
Mm,
and I was in the hospital with her until the end, and we had found out that these Christians were trying to find where we were because someone that worked with her mother had mentioned the situation, and we had specifically told them to stay away.
mm,
And they hunted us down. They found the hospital we were staying at, the room we were staying at, and against our will, uh, did what they did. And
yeah.
I was wanting to. I don't know. I'm not generally a violent person, but I wanted to throw a chair at them.
Yeah.
It's like, what the fuck are you doing?
Yeah.
And that's where it's become very hard to be patient with religious people when that's the behavior that we're met with.
Yeah. It's unfortunate in those painful situations as well. It's like, it goes back to what I was saying earlier. I think a lot of Christians are just motivated by that fear of hell, for others factor, and it can express itself in really, really toxic and traumatic ways.
Yeah,
So I get it.
yeah, 100%. But well, thanks again so much for coming on. I hope you'll be back.
Sure, man. Yeah, let's
Um,
do it again.
Thank you for sharing your insight and the way that you think about these things. I hope you had a good time. I know this was kind of totally forgot that we were supposed to do this, and I
I was
totally
like,
lost
"Hey,
track
we're
of
doing
things.
this tonight," or
Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
it's all good, man.
My,
It worked out. I
my
appreciate you
sense
having me.
of time is progressively getting worse. But no, like I said, I appreciate you and your time and the way that you think about stuff. So
I appreciate that, brother.
um, thank you everybody as always for tuning in and joining us tonight. So we'll probably be back in a couple of days with an episode of Axioms on Trial. Yeah, I hope everybody has a great night. So thanks again.